Center. My name is Jeff DeBelco. I'm fortunate enough to direct the Environmental Change and Security Program, and on behalf of my colleagues, the Africa Program as well, we are thrilled to be hosting today's session that we've titled Examining Environmental Links to Peace and Conflict in Sudan, a presentation of the UN Environment Program's new Sudan Post-Conflict Environmental Assessment, a report that just came out this summer. Some of you know, but we see some new faces here. I'll tell you a bit about where you're sitting and why this meeting is exactly what we're trying to do here at the Center in terms of facilitating dialogue on these kinds of issues. The Woodrow Wilson Center is actually the formal memorial to Woodrow Wilson as our only president who had a PhD, for better or worse. Congress said that we should set up a living memorial where these worlds of scholarship and analysis could come together where the worlds of practice and policy so that both could learn from one another. In many respects, this is embodied in this report today in terms of the scientific assessment of a set of issues that are critically important in the policy arena. The Environmental Change and Security Program, we're going on our 14th year, trying to look at issues of environment, development, health within foreign policy and security policy contexts. And so again, today's topic is quite appropriate with a focus on Sudan and these issues. We do that in the form of meetings like this, as well as a range of publications that I hope you will pick up, as well as picking up this excellent report that we're discussing today. So we're very pleased to be achieving one of our other objectives, which is Washington not just talking to Washington and getting folks from outside the Beltway into the discussion to share their expertise and their perspectives. And so we have two folks from UNEP, one based in Nairobi, one based in Geneva, to come present this report today. Ibrahim Thiaw is the director of the Division of Environmental Policy Implementation at UNEP, based in Nairobi. Before that, he was regional director at IUCN for their West Africa program and was also acting director general at IUCN. A long history of experience in working in developing country settings on environmental issues, particularly forestry sectors, and particularly obviously in Africa. And so it's a real thrill that he is coming to participate in this launch, and it's his division within UNEP that has the post-conflict branch, or now the post-conflict and disaster management branch, which is the specific component of UNEP that's produced this report, and I should say, frankly, quite a few reports in the same vein of doing external scientific objective assessment of different country settings in post-conflict settings that are a tremendously rich resource. A few examples are out there, but they're very good at putting it all on the web, and I urge you to go find that. Andrew Morton is the Sudan program director for the post-conflict branch, and really one that has spent now some years, we can say, on this report and on this topic, comes with a background in working on environmental mitigation, particularly in the oil and petroleum issues. And so obviously it makes a lot of sense for why Andrew was deeply involved in this project in Sudan. So we're going to turn the floor over to them, make a presentation, and then we'll be sure to have time for Q&A. When it comes time for the Q&A, I ask that you wait for one of my colleagues to bring a microphone to you. We are webcasting this meeting live, and we want the folks online to be able to hear your question and hear who you are and where you're coming from as well. So I'll turn the floor over now to Ibrahim. Welcome.
Thank you. You want me to
whichever you prefer. This may or may not work for advancing the slides. One never knows with the technology.
That's for him.
Okay.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for having organized this, and it's really great to be here and to see so many faces. You may have guessed already that English is not my mother tongue, so please bear with me if you have some trouble understanding what I'm trying to say. This report that UNEP has published earlier this year is not the first of its kind. UNEP has been associated with conflicts and the environment for almost 8-9 years now. The first one was in the Kosovo, and then eventually UNEP moved to other places of conflicts like Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Liberia, and so forth. And we just have a mission at the moment in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to actually have a scoping exercise to see whether we can have a similar exercise in DRC in the coming years. pending, of course, availability of funds. This report, I'm sure you have all read the report cover to cover, so it will be very easy for us to introduce the subject. The point here is to really have an interaction with you. We are trying to highlight the strong links that are out there between the conflicts and the environment. We would like to stress that from the outset, and maybe in the conclusions we'll see how the environment can contribute to peace building in the country. Basically, the situation is a little bit different from the north and the south of the country. The northern part is dry, so you have arid lands, and you have, of course, a growing population all over the country. But the fact that the northern part is arid lands makes it a little bit more difficult in terms of access to natural resources. So competition for access to water, for access to land, for access to grazing land, to farming land is accelerating in the northern part of the country. And the displacements of people, millions of people that have been moved from their places and being posted in camps is another strain to the environment. You will see some pictures from Andrew where literally the vegetation has been wiped out around camps in a walking distance. So that is a real problem to the environment in the north. In the southern part, as you know, they signed a peace agreement between the north and the south in 2005. So with the peace coming back to the southern part, which is a much greener part of the country, where you have real trees. Actually, you have even tropical forests in the extreme south. That is creating challenge as well because of new resettlements, because of construction of roads, because the human footprint on the environment is going to be higher in that part. So, in a sort of paradox, the fact that the South was in war was actually a favorable condition to the environment because there were very limited infrastructure. So people could not access to many places. The southern part is also extremely rich in wildlife. You will see some pictures from Andrew where you have huge herds of animals outside of national parks and millions of animals literally moving, migrating from a place to another. So that is also extremely good news, but quite fragile environment that need to be taken care of. Andrew will make a longer presentation, and I don't want us to repeat each other. Obviously, we are addressing the same report, so I think we'll just stress on important elements there. The links between climate change and the environment and poverty in Sudan needs also to be stressed. We all know that the poorer the country is, the more difficult it will be to adapt to climate change because people don't have means, especially in a country that is in war. So it is extremely difficult for these people to cope with drought, but also with floods and all kinds of changes. So it is particularly difficult for people there again that are living in camps. The report came up with some conclusions, and I would just like to stress on the importance of the international community to respond to the call that the Sudanese government and the Sudanese people are making in order to restore the environment and to make sure that the environment is preserved. We believe that the strong linkages that will be highlighted by Andrew between the environment and peace or conflict. Given these strong linkages, it will be extremely difficult to find a long-term peace in the country unless the environment is taken care of more seriously. It is very important that peacekeeping forces are in place to settle down the situation, to calm the situation, to create a climate of development. But the root causes of the conflict, one of the root causes of the conflict is access to natural resources. So unless a solution is found to that problem, we will be running the risk of having additional conflicts, even if we come up with a peace now. So I think it is important to stress that this is not particular to Sudan. It is the case for many countries, especially in the arid lands. But we would like to stress this because Sudan is now in an extremely difficult situation. Fortunately, the humanitarian assistance is coming up with strong forces. Andrew will mention again some figures. $2 to $3 billion per year are being spent in Sudan at the moment on humanitarian aid. Literally, almost, very little is spent on the environment amongst the, with that money. Of course, we understand that with the humanitarian aid, the first priority will be to provide food, to provide water, to provide shelter, etc., etc. But there again, unless we take into consideration some of the root causes of the conflict, it will be very difficult to get out of the humanitarian spiral. The report is proposing that, is suggesting that for the next 3 to 5 years, $120 million be spent on the environment, basically to strengthen the structures in the country, to help the civil society, to help NGOs, and to assist the government in building capacities, both in the north, but more importantly in the south, where there is a new government and the Minister of Environment has been literally created with the rest of the government. So it is important to make sure that this money is provided to Sudan. 120 million for 5 years will represent 0.012% of the current expenditure on humanitarian aid in Sudan. So it is extremely limited, but it will be extremely important for the country and for the population of the Sudan, and it will contribute a lot to the peacekeeping in the country. I think I will stop here because Andrew has been running around the country, spending tens of thousands of kilometers of roads, good and bad, more bad than good. And he will be presenting the report, and then maybe in the discussions afterwards we'll have more interaction. Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Ibrahim, for that introduction. Today I'll cover more than just the topic of conflict environment. I'll talk about the assessment itself, the scope, what we did, some of the key findings, and then what we intend to do about it, UNEP, and what we propose for the international community. So the first thing to note is that this assessment we did in Sudan, it covers the entire country, and it attempted to cover in moderate detail all of the environmental issues. That's because it's quite impossible to separate chronic and conflict-related issues when you come across situations such as you have in Sudan. So it is really a snapshot of the environment of the country in 2006, at a stage when you have a post-conflict setting between north and south and ongoing conflict in Darfur. In that context, the study was fairly classical. We had a desk study which continued in phases as we continued to uncover a lot of information hidden in archives and universities in Sudan. We had remote sensing, which was mainly looking at land use change, classification of forestry and rangeland. What we're trying to do there was analyse the rate of deforestation and land degradation, trying to get some numbers on this trend. A lot of field work, which was of two types. Reconnaissance, which basically meant driving all over the country and asking people questions, taking photographs and doing ad hoc inspections. It's fairly challenging in Sudan for security reasons, logistics. They have very poor roads, a long wet season in the south, insecurity in the north, in Darfur, landmines, and a range of other obstacles. So in combination with that, we had technical teams from national institutes and NGOs going out and doing more detailed interviews and technical analysis of things like rangelands and forestry trends. The whole exercise was done in conjunction and cooperation with the governments of Sudan. In fact, we had government experts along with us along half of the trips. They were involved in the scoping, and we had a long process of input through organising 2 workshops where national scholars were invited to present papers. At the stage of draft reporting, the draft was sent around to the governments, They held workshops with the various ministries, and all the input was put into the report you see. So we believe we can say that this is a government-owned and endorsed report. And in fact, during the actual launch in Khartoum and in Juba, the two capitals, the government was actually leading that program, and they've certainly picked up the report and working hard on implementation recommendations, which is one of the key objectives we have for the whole report. So we're quite pleased about that. We'll start with a positive finding, because we find that most of the discussion on Sudan is all about negative things happening in Darfur, and that's not the whole country. First of all, we believe that there's a perfect conditions right now for integrating sustainable development principles into the recovery of the majority of Sudan. So we have the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which created peace in southern Sudan, which is still holding. We have significant natural resources, particularly in southern Sudan. We have good technical capacity, particularly in northern Sudan. And overall, now is the right time. Investment funding is coming into southern Sudan in particular to help the recovery. To give you an example of some of the positives, this is what it looks like in some parts of southern Sudan. There's a teak plantation there from the 1970s, which is a multi-million-dollar resource which can be sustainably managed and provide livelihoods and export revenue. Some of the positive indicators. In geographic terms, 75% of the country is at peace. You can travel around most of the country, roads are being built. There are significant oil revenues which are now stable and gradually increasing. The peace agreement between North and South also initiated a process of government reform. There was creation of a new regional government in the South, essentially from scratch, a new constitution, new ministries, new civil service, and there's also decentralisation of power to each of the 25 states. So the governors now have more authority to actually manage their own areas. So these are all positive trends, and it makes it a very good time to come in with assistance in the form, for example, of legislation development or capacity building for government authorities, such as their equivalent of the EPA. There are major forestry resources remaining in the south. For example, a forestry colleague talked about the scale of mahogany, natural mahogany resources across the south could be sustainably harvested, provide millions of dollars of export revenue, and at the moment they're burnt basically to clear land for growing corn. So we have quite a few opportunities. In the north, the Red Sea marine environment is in excellent condition. There's 100 kilometres which are under significant pressure because of city development and some land-based pollution, some salt pans. But the other 700 kilometres of coastline is in excellent condition. It's virtually undeveloped. There's good local recognition of environmental issues. They won't often call them environmental issues, they'll call them natural resource or livelihood issues or rangeland problems they have, but they understand issues such as condition of the land, soil erosion, etc. There's strong technical capacity, intellectual capacity, particularly in the north. We have good universities there. And on the international level, there is now more of a recognition of the subject we're talking about today, which is the linkages between environment, poverty, population displacement, and conflict, sort of the overall nexus between fragility of states and environmental degradation. So it's also helping us in pushing this message and getting international assistance to the right areas. The negative finding. This essentially affects what we call dryland Sudan, which is the northern half of Sudan, which ranges from desert to semi-arid. Now in this area, desertification, land degradation, deforestation, and climate change and other forms of environmental change and degradation really are tightly linked to poverty, to displacement and to conflict. And this is a problem which affects all of dryland Sudan, so it goes from Darfur in the west across to Kassala in the east. And we believe this problem is unchecked, it's very complex, and it is going to get worse. The scale of it can easily overwhelm development efforts and perpetuate humanitarian aid dependency. So it is a massive problem. Some of the indicators of this problem. It's very hard to quantify desertification, but essentially we believe that desert-like conditions have extended south from the fringe of the Sahara into what is called the Sahel Belt in Sudan, areas that used to be semi-arid but productive rangeland and rain-fed agriculture, sort of growing sorghum. So essentially a huge amount of land has been degraded and lost to productivity since the 1930s. Rainfall gauges show that we have a drop in some areas of rainfall of over 30% and increasing unreliability of rain. What that means historically, and we've seen it, is a lot of crop failures, droughts, and real high losses in annual production of sorghum and other sort of food basics. Climate change and crop models, which have been done for both the Sahel Belt as a whole and also for parts of Sudan, give an even grimmer picture. Essentially, climate change models in general for the Sahel Belt predict a slight increase in temperature, a moderate decrease in rainfall, and an increase or decrease in reliability of the rainfall. If you put that data into crop modelling, you then find what happens in terms of your harvest potential and your productivity. And we see in some of the worst areas 20 to 70% drop in productivity from existing levels. That's excluding issues such as fertility loss. Essentially, it means that large areas on the fringe of the desert in Sudan are going to lose their food production capacity. And that is the home to several million Sudanese people at the moment. There are currently 5 million people in Sudan on food and nutritional aid. You're looking at maybe doubling that if you look at these figures in the long term. Okay, in addition to this food-related issues, food security, we have deforestation ongoing, which is well advanced in northern Sudan and less so in the south. We've already seen displacement and conflict linked to resource scarcity, so the effects are already here. And of most concern, the efforts, both at national and international level, to combat these problems are very limited in scale. There's some acknowledgement of the problems, but we see nothing substantive in terms of policy or investment to reverse this trend. So at the moment, it is unchecked. The pictures there, to give an example, that is top one, is just outside a refugee camp in Darfur. And you can walk through these areas and you can't find seeds, you cannot find straw. All of the trees have been dug up, the roots have been dug up and used as firewood. It is absolutely scorched earth, and you can see the problems there of large concentrations of people in areas where there's limited natural resources. So it has really worsened the situation. And in the picture below is again next to a camp in Darfur, and people just hand chiseling away trees to get fieldwood. In some areas now, you have food aid being sold so people can buy timber in which to cook the food. So it's a problem which needs to be addressed by the aid community to start to pick up the issue of the use of natural resources by displaced populations. It's just one of the problems. One of the detailed areas we looked into, what is the actual impact of the conflicts on the environment, a sort of impact assessment, so to speak, on conflict. The conflicts in Sudan have been relatively low technology, very dispersed, long-term. So the direct impacts, what we sort of call the military impacts, have been fairly limited. The most important ones we see come from targeted natural resource destruction, in other words, sort of environmental vandalism or scorched earth policy, whichever way you'd like to call it. And we see that mainly in Darfur, where there's deliberate destruction of forests. And the example there you see is the trees cut down there. Some parts for fodder, but they also cut down trees which can't be used for fodder. So it's sort of resource denial as a military tactic. The indirect impacts are actually the more important because they're the more severe, and that is the displacement of the population. 5 million displaced. There's still at least 4 million displaced. There's gradual returns going on. The conflict-related resource exploitation, by that we mean a sort of conflict economy. In the north and south it was hardwood, and now in Darfur and in the areas on the north-south provisional border, it's charcoal. There's sort of a exploitation of uncontrolled exploitation of those natural resources. We see a lot of short-term survival strategies, where people know that it's not the right thing, but they have no choice. An example is in rangelands where conflict has cut off the access routes for pastoral migration. So cattle are concentrated in one area, and that area is badly overgrazed. That's happened in the north and the south, and it's happening in Darfur. People cannot get their cattle to market in Libya, for example, so they're sitting in small areas. And large parts of the country were basically outside the rule of law for many years. So all of governance suffered, including things such as poaching and tree felling. This is the core topic for today, and I've only got one slide, but we could go on for hours about the complexity of this topic. The first thing to note is that there are many causes of conflict and many levels of conflict in Sudan and Darfur. We'll talk about one level and one cause. Particularly, we're talking now about dryland Sudan, and includes Darfur, but it also includes central Sudan, such as states for those who know it, such as Kordofan, and the Eastern Front in areas such as Kassala. These all have the same general climate and ecology and social mix, the same general social mix, so they have the same type of problems. First thing to note is that competition for the natural resources in these areas has always been a catalyst for conflict between the different rural groups. That's between pastoralists and farmers, and between groupings of those people. The history of it is being well documented actually by national scholars. In the main report you'll see a reference there by a Sudanese scholar, and he has mapped the causes of large-scale conflict on a tribal level in Darfur since the 1920s through to 2003. And it's on page 82 of your main report. If you look at that list, you see that water and rangelands predominate as the cause listed. What has happened since then is that the intensity and the frequency of these conflicts has gone up, and the options for reconciliation and conflict resolution have disappeared or been dampened. This is partly due to the increased pressure, but also due to a legal reform in the 1970s which abolished the power of tribal councils and other bodies, traditional bodies, which were able to provide a forum for reconciliation and compensation of these sort of small-scale problems before they grew. Now there's a governance vacuum, and it's much more difficult to control. There's been massive increases in human and livestock populations. The human population is estimated the growth rate at 2.6% per annum, and in some parts of Sudan it's much greater than that because of in-migration. For example, the growth of Khartoum city is about 5% per annum. It's explosive growth. The livestock population has been well documented. In the 1960s, 1961, it was 29 million livestock, and in 2004 it's 135 million. So that's a fourfold increase in livestock over just over a generation, and the net result essentially is carrying capacity is exceeded, and you have overgrazing. The cause of this is principally due to veterinary advances. A lot of the disease was the main cap on livestock numbers, and now with immunisation, a lot of these problems have been removed. A further cause of pressure is displacement of these traditional farmers and pastoralists from their prime lands by modern mechanised agricultural schemes. Central Sudan is full of very, very large-scale dryland agricultural schemes which grow sorghum mainly and some millet. These areas are often abandoned. They weren't taken legally. There was no land tenure at that time, and they are often abandoned after several years because without fertiliser input the productivity drops dramatically, and it's cheaper to actually move on than it is to rehabilitate the land. As a result, when you drive through central Sudan, you see literally millions of hectares of just flat, treeless, peopleless plains. There's just nothing there. So there's been a huge deforestation associated with that. This essentially reduces the available land and resources for the pastoralist in particular. We've already talked about the reduction in rainfall. And related to this now, we have the degradation of the environment. And in resource terms, what happens there is the resource is shrinking, the productivity of the land is reducing. Net result we have is a trend of greatly increased demand and at the same time decreasing source, decreasing supply. This results in intense resource scarcity, and this crops up as its social symptoms are rural poverty, population displacement, changes in livelihoods, and in some cases conflict. To give you a simple example as to how this can happen, there was previously in places like northern Darfur and northern Kordofan a very well-established pattern between crop growers and pastoralists at the end of the dry season. The camel and cattle herds of the pastoralists were in the northern rangelands, drawing down the water supplies and the grazing that was there. At the same time, people just south of them were growing their crops. Ideally, the people would harvest their crops, and then the cattle would come through on defined routes, picking up both the stubble that was available in the harvested lands and also grass that was available in sort of reasonably well-defined migration routes, so that there was a sort of synergy and people traded and there was cooperation. Now you have larger herds and poorer conditions, so that they basically run out of grass and water in the northern areas early. They are forced to come south early when the crops are still in the fields. So you can imagine thousands of cattle coming to a sorghum field that's just about ready to harvest. You have conflict, and they can't go anywhere else because people have also been using the grass that has been there to grow their own cattle and goats. So you have many reasons for conflict, and without a reconciliation mechanism, these things can fester into long-term, large-scale conflicts. So we see the trend in multiple conflicts at very small scale all across northern Sudan. We see a massive migration to the cities, and we see a gradual migration to the south. And every time this is happening, the people who are already there in the south are protesting, and we have conflicts happening. So I'll jump onto a new topic now, a quick one, which is new for UNEP, and that's just the impact of the provision of international aid. And there's two parts to that. One is the actual environmental impact or footprint of what is done for humanitarian relief and peacekeeping. And the second is how well the programs are designed to deal with the reality of natural resource scarcity in the country. It's a huge business, aid in Sudan. There's what's called the UN Work Plan, which is 1.6 billion per annum. There's the North-South Peacekeeping Agreement, which is over a billion. Not all of it is spent in Sudan. We have a lot of aid which is not in the UN sphere. Islamic aid, Christian aid, some of the Arabic and Chinese aid is outside. It's not well measured, but is definitely there. And if we look now at the African UN hybrid peacekeeping force come in, we're probably looking at over 3 billion per annum going into Sudan. Most of it humanitarian, part of it development. So it represents at least 2 to 4% of the economy, and in some parts, in some Darfur towns, it can represent 50% of the economy. They're relief economies, relief sort of economic centres. We had a look and quantified the environmental safeguards and mitigation measures that are in place for humanitarian aid, for peacekeeping and some development aid. And in general, unfortunately, the findings are that it's completely inadequate. It simply is not good enough. This is an issue not just for Sudan, but it's particularly a problem for what we call chronic protracted crises. Emergency response is designed to get people, logistics, equipment, vital food supplies to a place in a hurry. It is not designed to deal with a crisis that goes on for 5, 10, 20 years. But that is exactly what has happened in Sudan. We've had an operation called Lifeline Sudan, which ran in the south for over 21 years, and we're now in the 5th year of the emergency response in Darfur. And for 5 years, people have been extracting natural resources to cook their food and draw water in these areas. So we have a range of problems there, and in particular there's a complex issue to do with the degrading environment and people on food aid. There are 5 million on food aid, yet around them the environment is still degrading. So can those people return back to their rural livelihood? In some cases, no, because what was happening before was not sustainable. they may go back, but they will probably have failure in their livelihoods and have to come back again to camps or move to the cities. So this needs to be drawn into the strategies of recovery for Sudan. We have a range of other detailed findings, which I won't cover in this session, but not all of them are negative. Just point that out. As discussed, there's actually some quite good resources still there, such as the wildlife in southern Sudan. It's one of the happier parts of my job, was to look at the wildlife in southern Sudan. Huge resource there of over 1 million animals migrating freely over areas outside national parks. It's easily bigger than the Masai Mara and one of the world's great wonders. So it's good to see that it's not all negative. Okay, recommendations, what to do about it. The first thing we recommend is invest in environmental and natural resource management. Basically, that will help improve recovery. It will improve the chances of peace in Darfur, and it will help avoid conflict in future. So it has dual purpose, as well as the underlying principle of sustainable development. One of the areas for investment is building capacity and awareness in the government. There's good awareness in civil society. What we need to do is build it into the ministries, into the areas where there's power to act. As a minimum, all the UN and other development projects in Sudan need to integrate environmental considerations better. And given the oil revenues, Sudan is in the lucky situation of being able to fund its part of its recovery. So we think the national, regional governments should pick up some responsibility for this. The way forward in detail. We've put in the report 85 recommendations. Each one has a cost, a time, and an owner, which is typically one UN agency and one ministry. The idea is to look at accountability and track what is actually implemented. 120 million is not enough to solve Sudan's environmental problems, but it should be enough to catalyse change and work on some of the critical issues. We are pushing again for counterpart funding by the Sudanese government. And on UNEP's side, we intend to establish a country program which will have a number of components. Essentially, my successor will live in Khartoum and run a specialised program which will look at advocacy and assistance to the rest of the UN to reduce its environmental impact, capacity building for the governments, work on environmental legislation, and a focused natural resource program which will look at water, particularly in Darfur, forestry, again in Darfur, and general natural resource mapping, resource assessments, gradually picking up all of the themes that we've discussed in this report. Further information, you can go to our website. There's a lot in the report, and the website will be updated as we start to roll into Sudan. Okay, I'll be happy to take questions, and thanks for your attention.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much, Ibrahim and Andrew, giving us a taste of what is in, as you saw when you came in, a sizable report that with 85 recommendations and such gives a lot of different ways that we can have a discussion. I'm sure there will be many different questions, so we'll go to that, and I'll reiterate my plea for waiting for one of my colleagues to come with a microphone, tell us who you are, and use the microphone so the folks online can hear you as well. So who would like to kick us off? Oh, lots of questions. So why don't we start? Gentleman right there.
My name is Daniel Saxon with the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And I guess it's a two-part question relating to property rights. And the first is, who owns the property that is being degraded? Is it tribal lands? Is it government lands? I'm assuming it's not privately owned. And secondly, in terms of your solutions, were there any considerations made for community-based natural resource management?
Okay. I think what we'll do is, because I see a lot of hands, we'll get a couple so we make sure we get people an opportunity. Ken, do you have a question? Rachel, right there.
Yeah, Ken Conca, University of Maryland. UN peace building is usually sort of organized into a paradigm of relief, recovery, and development. And the Sudan case is very complicated because depending on where you are in the country, you're in all three of those modes at once, and that seems to be really challenging, particularly for the national government to respond to that. So what are the implications of that for the UN role more generally?
And can I add on to that question, in terms of the preparation of the report, what kind of support, collaboration did you get from other parts of the UN, and then what have been kind of strategies in the reception from other parts of the UN in terms of how they're using this? Yes, the gentleman right here.
Charter and freelance correspondence. I have a couple questions. First is this, what is the methodology you use in remote sensing? And what's the budget of your project? And why there's a good local recognition the importance of the environment issue? And as to governance and rule of law to deal with this environmental issue, what's the government, local government, and also the UNEP going to do with them?
Okay.
Thank you.
We've got quite a few already, so why don't we give you, gentlemen, a chance to respond to those, and then we'll get some more hands.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Okay. Land tenure is a problematic issue for Sudan, and there is, in a peace agreement between North and South, one of the deals was to put together a land commission to start to work at this. Essentially, they have not successfully made the tradition from, I'd say informal, but traditional land-based mechanisms through to formal title, and it's extremely complicated because you have a lot of transitory occupation of lands, wet season, dry season, pastoral routes.
Can you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
And a lot of, I would say, occupation of lands before there was any formality about titles. There's also been a lot of development and land occupation during military periods. So we have an extremely complicated situation. It's recognised by all that it's problematic, and we need to start working on it. And I think that is another part which we will feed into. We'll feed the technical work into it, but FAO and UNDP, two other UN agencies, are leading that with the governments of both National Unity and in Southern Sudan. It's going to be particularly difficult, and it's probably the main obstacle to local peace in Darfur, because you have occupations as well happening. Okay, community-based natural resource management, yes, it is happening in lots of parts of Sudan, and it is a model, preferred model for a lot of programs, not just natural resource management, but community-based livelihoods, health, sanitation. It is the effective model. Modern practice shows that works very, very well. However, it's also extremely time and manpower intensive process to achieve, so it's quite difficult and slow. Also, you cannot do it in situations where the community is fragmented or destroyed, so it is only possible when you have a viable community, so it cannot be used right now in some places in Sudan. The second question concerned the division of labour, so to speak, between relief, recovery, development, and I'd add peacekeeping into that mixture. And it's extremely important to understand the differences, because they basically relate to funding and to policy. It is quite simple to get relief funding for Sudan in comparison to recovery and development funding. So there's a paradox there, and it's quite easy to sustain relief and food aid, but it's really hard, for example, for us to raise money for capacity building for the government. So we do have a problem with that, and the pressure from the government is always, can you please reduce relief and move on to recovery and development? The second part of the question related to other UN agency involvement. Essentially, they were deeply involved. We didn't have our own vehicles. We used everybody else's. We stayed in other UN compounds. They reviewed and worked on the report. FAO provided a lot of expertise. So, technical terms, quite good cooperation. And we will continue that cooperation. All our projects in Sudan are joint. So, with water, we'll be working with UNICEF. For forestry mapping, we'll be working with the Food and Agricultural Organisation. And on governance and rule of law, we'll be working with UNDP. So there is a partnership, and it's all held together by what we call the UN country team. We have a sort of council of UN members, and we discuss such things. I'll go back on one of those, the budget. difficult to say exactly what, because there was a lot of what we call in-kind assistance, services provided, but it was about $900,000 to $1 million, and spent over 2 years. Let's have a look at the next one. On the remote sensing, if you don't mind, I won't go into the detail as to the methodology used. We can have a one-to-one chat, and I can refer to my remote sensing gurus, which I am not, on that item. The final one, the question was government attitude. What is the government response to this? Well, overall, very positive. Although it's a political topic, it's not in the same league as some of the other political issues that international community has with Sudan. So we find it quite easy to get access and discuss these things quite openly, particularly since these people are living here and at this place, and they understand the environmental issues themselves. So we have debates, and they're more the normal debate you would see where, for example, the Environment Ministry doesn't have the power compared to the Energy Ministry or the Finance Ministry. And part of our approach is to continue advocacy, just as you would in any other country, to make those more powerful arms of government accountable and revise their policies. Okay.
Just, maybe just one comment on the cooperation with the UN. As Andrew said, the cooperation has been very good at the moment, and when the report was released, the Secretary General of the UN himself welcomed the report, and I think that was a very good signal. The UN resident coordinator in Juba came to Nairobi when we had a similar ceremony 2 weeks ago. He flew on from Juba to Nairobi to present, to be part of the presenters to the report. I think it is a very good signal that he also welcomes the report and is very pleased with that. That is the current stage. The difficulty, I think, will come when we start going into recovery and development. When Andrew mentioned that 5 million people are under relief and aid, humanitarian aid at the moment, the difficulty will come when these people will be turned back to development, and where would they go? And I think this is going to be key, because we all know the side effects on humanitarian aid, on social destruction and change of habitudes, and it will be extremely difficult to get these people back to development and to find land for them. And surely the issue of land is key. So to what extent the UN will be able to join forces and work with the government in a synergetic way to find a longer-term solution to the issue, I think is a question mark at the moment.
Lady in the back, and then lady in the red, and then we'll come down here, and we'll get you all. There are lots of questions, but so we'll start right there, please.
Hi, Sarah Preziosi from American University. What are some of your suggestions for humanitarian aid organizations to support environmental development?
Terrific. Thank you for being so concise. Yes, please. Okay, and then we'll go right back.
Hi, Katherine Porter with the Leadership Council for Human Rights. Thank you for this hopeful report. Having traveled in the region, I have heard over and over again from women whose voices are not heard, who want to have something that will allow them to cook food for their families and to prevent them from going out into the more remote areas where they are literally hunted. And over and over again, I hear that no one will listen to them at all levels. So I'd love for you to address that. And then it's impossible to look at this without thinking of the latest Al-Qaeda tape, which said they were going to attack the peacekeepers. And I'm interested in your views on both of these areas.
Okay, terrific. Sean, if you come all the way down the front, and then we'll work our way back down, a couple over here.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. In 1985, United Nations put a report address hunger all over the world in 530 pages. You can summarize it when one word repeated so many times: exploitation, 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 exploitation of water resources, exploitation of natural resources, exploitation of land ownership, exploitation of technology, exploitation of what they called at that time Cold War. And we keep going back and saying there is a conflict. This conflict continues to be for small and big reason and so on. But I think if we address the exploitation issue, the causes, rather than put a Band-Aid on whatever we think the conflict. So how is it, since it is UN report, how is it not being addressed, the causes, and only dealing? For example, all this desert, there could be technology to address irrigation, like in Arizona, they have drop irrigation, and they have advanced trees and growth and so on. Technology can be used to change that condition, drought condition but
terrific. No, that's great. The technology aspect in terms of what suggestions are, that's an excellent question. Yes, we have right here.
Hi, Beth Rodgers Whitty. I'm at the George Washington University, but also spent some time this last year in southern Sudan. And from your pictures, it looks like you've been to some of the rural areas where I was living in Abyei, right along the north and south. And it seems like there is some urbanization in southern Sudan, but for the most part, the environmental efforts should be targeted to the rural areas where it's harmful environmental techniques and practices that have been going on for centuries, and slash and burn and all sorts of those things that people's livelihoods kind of depend upon this. What would be your recommendation on kind of changing those behaviors from a grassroots level, or raising awareness at least about those behaviors, even though people depend on them for their economic livelihoods?
Okay, why don't we give you gentlemen a chance while there's still a manageable number.
You want to take the peacekeeper one, but otherwise
Maybe the technology as well.
Okay, first one was a very succinct question on what can humanitarian agencies do to support environmental aspects of development. First thing to note is that most of the humanitarian agencies also blend their efforts into development, for example, UNICEF and others. The central one for me, particularly for Darfur, is look at the two issues of water and energy. Sustainable water supplies, which help the surrounding population as well as the settlements, and look at how to put that in context of not just supplying tap water for refugees on a daily basis, but how to actually use this investment to improve the prospects for development on a longer term. Because there's big investment going on in that. For example, there's 1,200 wells being drilled by the water and sanitation section in Darfur over the last 4 years. Okay, it's a lot of investment. $25 million, I think the US is giving to that sector only last year. The second one is energy. At the moment, the traditional approach is that you supply shelter, try to supply security, supply tap water, health, food. What you don't supply is energy. And the traditional approach was to let the affected population obtain that energy from the surrounding environment. Now, as a minimum, that means you have environmental degradation in the areas surrounding all the settlements. And given that some settlements in Sudan have lasted for 27 years, there's been some serious degradation, for example, in around Khartoum and in eastern Sudan. But in places like Darfur, it actually means they've run out. They've run out of those resources. As discussed on the Fieldwood situation, you now have to buy your timber. You can't walk to get your timber in many areas. All the fodder has been picked up. People go 10, 15 kilometres out and they rake up the grass and sell it to farmers. So you need to look at how you will solve the energy situation. And I called all the humanitarian agencies. How are you going to solve it? Where are these people going to get their energy for the next 2 to 5 years or wherever? Because a lot of the crises we see, particularly in these fragile states, they go on for a long time. The population does not return, and particularly rural populations that rely on things such as annual seasons. If you miss 1 to 2 months, you miss a growing season and you have to wait till next year. So people are in these places for many years. So I'll move on to the energy a bit later. Okay, Fieldwood itself, I'm happy to announce that we've just received funding for a project on that. We heard the complaints as well, and there's a lot of effort being put into Darfur at least as to how to solve this problem. And people weren't looking at it from an environmental perspective, they're looking at it from a human rights side, protection, livelihoods, indoor air pollution, a whole range of issues. And for us, there's a whole range of things that can be done, but the first thing is improve the efficiency of wood burning, and that's fuel-efficient stoves, which are one part of the solution. And the other part is improve the sustainability of the supply, and in practical terms that can mean things like woodlots, etc. The third one is alternatives. Now, the problem with alternatives is economics. Basically, firewood and charcoal are the cheapest forms of energy, and they're also renewable in these places, and they stay outside the cash economy in many places. So there's no real substitute for fuel wood. We will look at things like solar, LPG gas, etc., but economics dictate that you've got to look again at natural resources, and there's no obstacle to having use of fuel wood if you simply make sure the supply is sustainable. So we have a $1 million, $1.4 million 2-year project starting up now, as in just starting, in Darfur, in cooperation with the other UN agencies, and we'll see how that goes. So yes, people are aware of the problem, and a lot of money has been spent, and now people are reviewing the effectiveness of that, and won't be giving up on the topic. On attacks on peacekeepers, we don't really want to comment on that, other than know that in the African Union they already are under attack. We are in a high security situation always in Sudan. People have been killed delivering relief already. I think there's been something like 80 hijacks. If we look at the UN global figures for casualties, Darfur is number 1, okay, higher than Iraq and everywhere. And the majority of the casualties are national staff driving relief vehicles out to remote areas. So they actually will continue to be far more exposed than peacekeepers. So our concerns are actually with the humanitarian community on that. Exploitation of natural resources, well, that was mainly a comment, but in terms of why are there no technical solutions being promoted, well, they are, but they've got to be very appropriate for local circumstances and sustainable. Development history is littered with high technology projects which are just sort of rusting in the desert, so to speak, after the sponsor is gone. So that's why we come back more towards community-based natural resource management as the right way to go, because the solutions there are owned and sponsored by the communities. We find they have a better chance of success than importing high technology. I think the final one, fifth, was Southern Sudan and destructive behaviours. And one of the examples there, which, well, you call it destructive or not, but it's certainly traditional, is to burn every year. The rangelands are burnt. And what you see is a lot of open plain in Southern Sudan is not natural open plain. If it was left without burning, it would turn into scrubland, sort of forested savanna. So by burning, you keep the pastures open, and that improves the grass production for your cattle. Well, the way I would change behaviour is to give economic incentive, motivation, because you can make more out of the land and do it sustainably by simply changing. Instead of burning the trees, sell them, retain ownership over that and sell the charcoal. Instead of having very large herd sizes and old cattle, have smaller herd sizes and more money through selling them. So it has to be economic incentive. And if it's environmentally sustainable, well, you don't advertise that so much. You simply advertise the fact that this is a longer term, more profitable way to get a livelihood out of these same land and areas. And then I'll pass over to Ibrahim for his responses.
Basically, you covered most of the questions. Just to comment on exploitation and technology. There are technologies that need to be introduced in the Sahel in general, not only in Sudan, but also in other places like Chad, Mali, Niger, etc. And this is what some technicians call aridiculture, basically developing agriculture in arid lands. And there are some good sciences that have been developed and good techniques that probably need to be introduced in these places. We have to find a solution to the 5 million people, once again, that need to return to development. And the solution will not be to have them all migrate to cities, because that will be creating another problem in the longer term. And don't think in Sudan the solution will be for these 5 people in Darfur to migrate to the south, given the particular situation of the country. So I think it is important that new technologies are developed that are adapted to the local conditions and that are adapted to the scarcity of water resources. The main difficulty there is to find enough water resources to sustain the production. On wood production, on wood and cooking, this is probably one of the most difficult issues that all humanitarian agencies face in arid lands or when they have camps, is to sustain production of wood and energy. I think the difficulty in a country like Sudan is really the quality of the roads. It has been noted that in most arid lands of the world, the economic figures is not a problem, because that is the only alternative that is left to people, like transport of the LPG to cities. The difficulty is to find enough good roads and to have security so that the transport is made correctly. Slash and burn, of course, it has been going on for years and generations in most of the semi-arid and sub-arid areas where people need to burn these grasses to have fresh grass for production and so forth. The problem, I think, is that people do not realize that there are now less rainfall in the same areas they have been burning for years, then they need to adapt to the new conditions, and they don't realize that, and they keep perpetuating the same techniques as if the conditions have not changed. And of course, it has been seen again in many other arid lands where actually you burn until the last time you can see grass, and you burn the seeds with that, and it is a problem. I think it's a matter of awareness. It's a matter. They don't see it as a destructive technique. They see it as a normal way of managing their life. So I think if you come with a negative tone saying that what you are doing is not right, I think we will be in trouble. It is important that we come with the right language and explain and try to have them adapt. Actually, it's an adaptation problem to climate change.
Terrific. Yes, we had Rachel. Why don't we just move right up the line there with the questions? Here we have these 4. We'll get all 4 of you.
Hi, my name is Valerie Ndaruzani. I'm a project manager for Global Water, and I work for Institute Multi-Track Diplomacy. And I believe my boss was the initiator of UNEP in the United Nations. My question is, if we find enough resources and we provide resources to the north, do you think they will stop moving to south? Also, what is the overarching issue that should be solved as really a priority on the agenda of international community or national governance to solve the problem? Thank you.
Okay. And then right there in the black, and we'll keep going back up.
Hi, Victoria Mallet with the Constituency for Africa. My question is, given the situation in neighboring countries regarding lack of groundwater and conflicts, especially in the Horn of Africa, how is that going to affect Sudan's environmental future?
Okay, if you could hand it just right behind you there. Yep, thank you.
Thanks. My name is Cecilia Rypinska from the World Resources Institute. I just want to thank for a very important report and assessment to begin with. You mentioned that you had identified specific UN agencies and government ministries for each of the recommendations made in this report. And I was wondering if you had also identified the role of other important actors in terms of the bilaterals, World Bank Group, African Development Bank, etc., and their role for these recommendations, and also if you see a role for the UN and UNEP in terms of coordinating different efforts in Sudan, so that there is some sort of harmonization in terms of considering ecosystem change for development in Sudan.
Okay, terrific. That lady in the hat in the back, and then we'll move over to the gentleman.
Hi, Jones Pauling, Institute of Peace. You had mentioned that at one point the government had destroyed the traditional authorities, when you were in Kordofan, I think. But in southern Sudan, it is pretty much intact. And I was wondering whether you had included the chiefs in the 10 states in the south to be consulted in this matter, the study you're doing, because they're extremely keen on keeping this communal land tenure, which is mentioned in the CPA, and to restore their own traditional mechanisms for who gets to use the forest, who can take so many of the land, who can take so much of the water or use of animals. And then secondly, whether you had gone to the oil lands, which is an extremely important environmental question, particularly for the South.
Terrific, thank you. I think we'll stop there. We'll start with the gentleman in the back in the next round, but give you guys a chance here.
Okay. So the first was a speculative question on whether if natural resources were provided, would north-south migration stop? Well, I can't really answer that, but people aren't migrating south for anything other than necessity. So if solutions are found, I'm sure they would prefer to avoid conflict and avoid uprooting their lives and losing their traditional livelihood and birthplace. So it's, yes, it is more than likely that it would, if it works, this process would stop. We're talking about a very difficult long-term problem. But note that these people have, there's no border. These people have always intermingled. You just want to make sure that the pressure points are relieved on this intermingling, because part of that mixing was positive, was to do with trade and other opportunities. So you don't want to separate and stop it, you just want to relieve the pressure. Lack of groundwater. Sudan doesn't have a lack of groundwater. It has a lack of exploitation and organisation of its resources. Even where it is quite arid, you have wadis and you have aquifers. What is needed is careful management of these resources. Now they have groundwater depletion happening in some areas alongside the Nile, where they're pulling down too much water for seasonal sort of irrigation. But in general, there's hardly any exploitation of the major resources there. Now what's important is that all the lessons learned worldwide integrated into Sudan, so you don't have irretrievable drawdown problems and waste a precious resource. So groundwater is an opportunity for Sudan, Darfur included. The role of other actors in the recommendations. Well, because they're 2 to 5 year, we put the UN agencies as the focal point, so to speak, to make sure that somebody owns it. But we do expect other groups, World Bank, government, etc., to be involved. We're seeing them this afternoon, actually. So yes, there is plans to be involved, and the World Bank is already there in Sudan, managing the multi-donor trust funds, which are part of the recovery process for North and South. The coordination role, that is part of the plan for our program. We will try to act as a focal point or a sort of a hub for a network of environmental actors in the country. There's already such a network at the national level, but there is nothing yet coherent at the international agency level. So that is part of our plan. Third question, or fourth, sorry, was the role in consultations with the chiefs in the south. Yes, of course, we saw them. Actually, quite a few of them now are governors and commissioners, but they're still chief of the area, and they do recognise these areas. That's why we welcome the decentralisation of power, because I think that's a positive trend. In general, a positive trend. Sometimes, though, it's been a bit negative in some areas because people have jumped on the resources they control and simply sold them off quite quickly. And traditional law is extremely strong in southern Sudan. So that is, again, good and bad, but it means that there's a mechanism through which you can integrate. And the government of southern Sudan has got its own challenges in that respect. It's building a modern parliament at the same time as having social structure built on tribal loyalties and all sorts of other livelihood patterns, which mean it's quite a complex job. The oil lands, or the oil developments, yes, we visited some of them, and we also received a lot of feedback about the situation there. There's two sides to the oil question. One is the distribution of the wealth, the revenue that comes from oil. That's not an issue which is of specialist concern to us. It's obviously a critical concern to the country, but it's not a UNEP topic. What we are concerned about is the environmental impact of the oil industry. We heard both good and bad, and we saw both good and bad, and there are definitely some real problems, particularly in the border areas, Abyei and Upper Nile. What is needed is to simply bring the oil industry into the normal route of international governance and transparency, and that'll be a slow process. On the positive side, the facilities are quite new investment and modern technology, and also it's a rich industry. They can afford to have high standards, so it's not an aid situation, it's a governance situation. On the negative side, the environmental question gets mixed in with the social and the legal and the human rights issues, which means that it's almost impossible to do things in the short term in some areas and the oil fields in Sudan. But certainly there's pressure from government of Southern Sudan to reduce the environmental impact, and there's a lot of initiatives trying for that. Okay.
Maybe just two comments. One on the migration. Migration and movement is part of management of natural resources in arid lands. It is very important that people keep moving. Unless they keep moving, the animals will die. I mean, it is impossible to have them in one place. So it is part of the tradition, and I don't think any agency should try to stop that. It will be a disaster. It has been tried in other places. It never worked properly, and people prefer to commit suicides rather than be settled. What is important is to make sure that when these migrations that they are planned, and there is a land use planning process in the country. When Andrew mentioned the migration, the corridors, migration corridors, and the fact that animals were coming after farmers had harvested the production, that is a technique that has been going on in most of the arid lands in Africa, and it has to continue. And I beg that we don't think about any plan to stop that in any way, and it goes beyond boundaries, beyond national boundaries anyway, in many places. On the roles and responsibilities, Andrew mentioned that UNEP will be setting up a small project unit in Sudan, and the main objective there is to make sure that there is a better coordination amongst all development aid agencies and humanitarian agencies, the UN and non-UN bodies, including actually NGOs, both conservation NGOs, but also humanitarian NGOs. Just to give you an example, the UN representative in the south in Juba explained that after the war there were only 6 kilometers of paved road in the southern part of Sudan. Now they have built more than 1,200 kilometers of roads in the country, which is a tremendous effort. To what extent environmental impact studies have been done? Of course, you are in a difficult situation. You don't have time. You have to do something. But if UNEP or other agencies are not there to assist or to provide input to that, they will do whatever they can do in good faith. And then it will be late when we discover that maybe it should have been done differently. So it is important that a small unit is being set there and to work with other agencies. UNEP will not be the agency that will be solving all problems in Sudan. Our role is to trigger discussion and to see how we can facilitate discussions, and that is one of the reasons why we are having a series of meetings here. We had many in New York. We have had many others in Khartoum and in Juba.
Terrific.
Let's start with the gentleman in the back, and we'll get these questions in the back.
Neil Shea from National Geographic Magazine. You mentioned in the report that Sudan has a huge number of displaced persons, and I'm just wondering what some of the strategies are that you'll be able to use as these people start to return to their homelands or their villages, places that may or may not be able to sustain them when they come back. So is there anything new that we can do to sort of help people back to their home areas without creating another environmental disaster as they return?
Okay. And John, you had a couple over there, yeah?
Thank you. Karen Whitus from the International Development Law Organization. My comments are perhaps a little more political. What percentage of the conflict does UNEP or the UN agencies combined attribute to environmental concerns? Which is, I guess, another way of saying, if you make substantial progress in the next 3 to 5 years on your recommendations, how far will that go to resolving the conflict situation, particularly in Darfur? And a related question is, you have 85 or 83 or 85 recommendations, each with a Sudanese government agency or department or ministry as a partner. What's your appraisal of the political will to actually go forward and implement these recommendations?
Okay, ma'am, if you could pass it just back down your row. We have someone right there in the middle. It's tough to get to, and then we'll get these other two.
Yes, I want to congratulate you on a very sophisticated report. Kay Mosley, I'm an independent scholar, I'm retired. I want to ask, however, the extent to which you may think, though it would not be politic to say so, perhaps in the report in any blunt way, the extent to which demographics may really swamp all these mitigating efforts and development efforts, which are praiseworthy and fine. But when we look at the figure, which I want to congratulate Mr. Morton for mentioning again in his oral presentation on page 8, the explosion in livestock from 28 to 134 million head. This is absolutely critical. What is being done to cull, to sell? Is there a will to address the problem of these herds, which are politically extremely significant too, since it is major actors, often army leaders, chiefs, etc., very powerful people who often have a vested interest in growing these herds. Secondly, we do not see in the report a figure for human populations. It is mentioned 2.6% per annum growth, probably in general. What has it been in Darfur? What does it look like over the past 50 years? And to what extent is the international community going to begin to grapple again with the taboo subject of overpopulation, especially in an era of declining resources and climatic change? Thank you.
Okay. And get that back, and then in the back row there.
Rachel Drakowski, American University. My question has to do with, has Sudan's neighbors been informed of the gravity of the situation? Because obviously they have a large, they have a large stake in this, because if this environmental crisis forces hundreds of thousands of refugees to go over the borders, hundreds of thousands more to go over the borders into these neighboring countries, they could face their own environmental crisis or more political instability. So have any of these neighbors shown an interest in helping out with this initiative?
Okay, why don't we take those?
Yeah, it's quite a few.
Yeah, another full agenda.
Okay. You really want to jump on? Otherwise I could. Okay, I'll zip through them. Return strategies for IDPs and how to reduce the environmental damage. Well, one that is missing at the moment, I see, is agroforestry. Because certainly in some parts of southern Sudan, I see a huge potential for that to be implemented. We're quite late to the game. Returns are already happening. So that's one that I would like to see. In another part, in Darfur, happily we can also announce there's a project starting with UN Habitat to look at another mitigation measure called woodless construction, essentially teaching people how to build houses with less timber, because rebuilding the 2 million dwellings or houses for those people will take a lot of timber. So that's another one of the mitigation measures possible. Certainly not enough, but that's just two examples. What percentage would we attribute as a cause environmental degradation, climate change? Well, we're not going to give a number. It cannot be done. It's not a thing you can quantify because all the evidence is anecdotal. It's simply interviews with people explaining why and how, what happened, etc. You could simply do lots of interviews and get a percentage, but that wouldn't really add any value. For us, it's simply one of the causes, and in some respects, it doesn't really matter because for peace to occur, you need all of the pieces in place. If the political solution is not there, or the environmental, or the social, or the legal, the whole thing will fall apart. It's like pieces of a sort of bridge. So it doesn't matter what percentage, they all need to be solved. What is the political will for implementation? Mixed. It is mixed. It is strong in the south, but the capacity is extremely limited, and the priorities are sort of enormous mix. In the north, it's mixed again. Some ministries and individuals are very good, some are quite conservative. It's simply, I would say, a classic situation I'd put in parallel to a lot of Western economies in the 70s. Gradual awareness raising and mainstreaming of policy into the finance, planning, energy ministries. So there is an advocacy job ahead, but it's certainly not hopeless by any means. Third one about demographics and overwhelming the other factors. There's a real risk that is the case. If we don't improve the situation by at least 2.6% per annum, we're losing ground. The area issue of livestock, well, we're probably capped out on livestock numbers because we already have high herd failures and we have all the other social factors capping livestock. On general issues of population, we do say in Chapter 2, I think we've given an estimate as 35 to 40 million is the population of Sudan. And there is actually a census planned, a national census for early 2008, and if that goes ahead in full, we'll have the first picture in full of Sudan for 30 years. So far we've had a lot of estimates, so there'll be quite some surprises, I'm sure, with the census. And the whole topic of demographics, etc., we actually have an agency created solely to deal with that and reproductive health. It's UNFPA, the population agency, and it can address all those topics. There is no simple political solution. It's a delicate topic, so we won't cover that anymore on this one. Final question. Sudan's neighbours, are they appraised of the situation? We actually presented this report in Addis Ababa to the African Union, so they are appraised, and in fact they've been swapping refugees for a long time in the Horn of Africa. There's been quite a few Ethiopian refugees in Sudan for some time and vice versa. They are well aware of that, and now the return process, we have several 100,000 moving from Uganda, CAR and Kenya back into southern Sudan, so they're quite well aware of the need for stability and sustainable solutions. Egypt, of course, is strategic partner to Sudan, and they watch everything to do with the environmental issue in Sudan, particularly water, as you can imagine. There's a treaty dealing with the Nile waters between Egypt and Sudan, which is closely monitored. Okay.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to we've got through a lot of questions, and I appreciate folks stating them very quickly, and also it's challenging. You've been quickly trying to catch up with them with the notes, but I think answered them all quite effectively, and didn't do what some of our past speakers have done, which is just kind of pretend to ignore the ones that you didn't care for. So you tackled them all, even the harder ones. It is a strategy that allows one to ignore the hard ones, but you didn't do that, so we appreciate it. Well, thank you very much. This has been tremendously helpful. I think this is an office and an approach that UNEP is using, this post-conflict branch and the post-conflict disaster management branch, that has really borne some fruit with some of the past assessments that have been done. I know there is no shortage of requests for these assessments to be done in other countries and in other settings. It is something that I know Andrew and Ibrahim and their colleagues probably spend more time than they'd like fielding requests and then spending a lot of time trying to raise money to get it done. This is not something that, at least historically, has been a part of the core UNEP budget, but something that the UNEP folks have had to work very hard to go in bilateral and multilateral settings to raise money. So all the more reason that these results are reported to wide audiences in places such as Washington, where at times there are resources. But I would urge you to keep track of the work of this office as we go forward in the reports. As I said, they are very good about putting it all online, and we're very pleased to have been working with various parts of UNEP on these issues here at the Wilson Center for some years now. So it's terrific to have them here, and we look forward to the opportunity to do it again in the future. So please join me in thanking our guests.
Yes.